All right, now we can get into what I really want to talk about, which is I want to do a comparative analysis of left versus right wing politics. For the most of my life, I have largely ignored the nonsense that is politics and the right wing versus the left wing and all the nuances associated with either party. And broadly speaking, we'll see if my opinions change after this study, but I look at politics, the left and right wing of politics, as sort of two wings of the same bird that is utilized by the government and mass media and interested parties thereof as a way to sow and perpetuate division within the nation. But that's just my opinion. I'm entitled to it. I just feel like it's all controlled opposition unto each other, and that they've got to keep us arguing and fighting because we are not truly united if we don't agree on anything. So they can do whatever they want in the White House, and then everybody else will just be fighting amongst themselves, ignoring it because they're preoccupied with their own day-to-day ridiculousness of all these ideologies and whatnot. So let's get into it. Left-wing politics, also called leftism. This describes the range of political ideologies that support and seek to achieve social equality and egalitarianism. Egalitarianism is a school of thought within political philosophy that builds on the concept of social equality, prioritizing it for all people. All people, not one race or the other, not one economic class or the other, all people. Interesting. Egalitarian doctrines are generally characterized by the idea that all humans are equal in fundamental worth and moral, blah blah blah, often in opposition to social hierarchy as a whole, or certain social hierarchies. Social stratification refers to a society's categorization of its people into groups based on socioeconomic factors like wealth, income, race, education, ethnicity, gender, occupation, social status, and derived power. So, left-wing politics seeks to achieve social equality. Egalitarianism, which is social equality for all people, and it's in opposition to social hierarchy as a whole, or certain social hierarchies. Left-wing politics typically involve a concern for those in society whom its adherents perceive as disadvantaged relative to others, as well as a belief that there are unjustified inequalities that need to be reduced or abolished through radical means that change the nature of the society they are implemented in. According to Emeritus Professor of Economics Barry Clark, supporters of left-wing politics claim that human development flourishes when individuals engage in cooperative, mutually respectful relations that can thrive only when excessive differences in status, power, and wealth are eliminated. This already sounds a little Marxist, communist type of thought. Within the left-right political spectrum, left and right were coined during the French Revolution. Here we go. French Revolution, the closest thing to the United States in recent history. It was a period of radical political and societal change in France that began in the Estates General in 1789 and ended with the formation of the French Consulate in November 1799. Many of its ideas are considered fundamental principles of liberal democracy. We're not going to go too deep on that concept, but just to say that I've studied a little bit of the French Revolution, and it looks a lot like what we can see today in politics and such. So, left and right were coined during the French Revolution, referring to the seating arrangements in the French Estates General. Those who sat on the left generally opposed the ancien regime, also known as the Old Regime. It was the political and social system of the Kingdom of France from the late Middle Ages until 1789 and the French Revolution, which abolished the feudal system of the French nobility and higher hereditary monarchy. All right, and the Bourbon monarchy, and supported the revolution. So those who sat on the left opposed the old regime of feudalism and the Bourbon monarchy and supported the revolution, the creation of a democratic republic, and secularization of society. Secularization is a multi-layered concept that generally denotes a transition from a religious to a more worldly level. Most versions of secularization do not lead to atheism, irreligion, nor are they automatically antithetical to religion. Antithetical to religion. Secularization has different connotations. Let's see. Different connotations, such as implying differentiation of secular from religious domains, the marginalization of religion in those domains, or it may also entail the transformation of religion as a result of its recharacterization as a private concern or as a non-political matter. We had this, I saw this when I was studying the Renaissance, and this move to a humanist kind of philosophy, whereas in a lot of places, especially bigger townships and city-states, would kind of remove themselves from religious views and the church, and they would want to be more worldly and self-serving and self-actualizing and self-enlightened and all of this, that, and the other. Pretty much kind of what we led into the Enlightenment period with. But that's neither here nor there, and we're not here to talk about the Enlightenment or the Renaissance. So, while those on the right were supportive of the traditional institutions of the ancient regime, usage of the term left became more prominent after the restoration of the French monarchy in 1815, when it was applied to the independents. The word wing was first appended to left and right in the late 19th century, usually with disparaging intent, and left wing was applied to those who were unorthodox in their religious or political views. Ideologies considered to be left-wing vary greatly depending on the placement along the political spectrum in a given time and space. At the end of the 18th century, upon the founding of the first liberal democracies, the term left was used to describe liberalism in the United States and republicanism in France. That's interesting. So it's opposite in the United States from what it is in France. Republicanism is an ideology centered on citizenship in a state organized as a republic. Historically, it emphasizes the idea of self-rule and ranges from the rule of a representative minority or oligarchy to popular sovereignty. It has had different definitions and interpretations which vary significantly. So, let's see, where were we? Liberalism, political and moral philosophy based on the rights of the individual, liberty, consent of the governed, political equality, right to private property, and equality before the law. Liberals espouse various views depending on their understanding of these principles, but generally support. Now, you see, this must be what they mean by what a Democrat used to be, because I don't hear too many liberals of today talking about right to own property, or political equality for that matter, consent of the governed, rights of the individual. Liberalism is a political and moral philosophy based on the rights of the individual. Rights of the individual, also known as, collective rights, are rights held by a group as a whole rather than individually by its members. Liberty is the state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life, behavior, or political views. If I think COVID is BS and I don't want to get a vaccine, that's my liberty. I'm exercising my liberty to not participate in your bullshit. Consent of the governed. In political philosophy, the phrase consent of the governed refers to the idea that a government's legitimacy or moral right to use state power is justified and lawful only when consented to by the people or society over which that political power is exercised. Political equality. A founding principle of many democracies. Political egalitarianism prefers less concentrated political power or influence, as well as equal and fair treatment of all regardless of characteristics like race, religion, wealth, and intelligence. Right to private property, or the right to own property, is often classified as a human right for natural persons regarding their possessions. A general recognition of a right to private property is found more rarely and is typically heavily constrained insofar as property is owned by legal persons. Equality before the law, also known as equality under the law, equality in the eyes of the law, and legal equality or legal egalitarianism is the principle that all people must be equally protected by the law. The principle requires a systematic rule of law that observes due process. Liberals espouse various views depending on their understanding of these principles, but generally support private property, market economies, individual rights, including civil rights and human rights, liberal democracy, secularism, rules of law, economic and political freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and freedom of religion, constitutional government, and privacy rights. Liberalism is frequently cited as the dominant ideology of modern history. It became a distinct movement in the Age of Enlightenment, gaining popularity among Western philosophers and economists. Liberalism sought to replace norms of hereditary privilege, state religion, absolute monarchy, and divine right of kings, and traditional conservatism. Traditional conservatism, often known as classical conservatism, is a political and social philosophy that emphasizes the importance of transcendent moral principles manifested through certain natural laws to which society should adhere prudently. Let's read a little bit further into that. Traditionalists. Conservatism is based on Edmund Burke's political views. Traditionalists value social ties and the preservation of ancestral institutions above excessive individualism. The concepts of custom, convention, and tradition are heavily emphasized in traditionalist conservatism. Theoretical reason is regarded as of secondary importance to practical reason. The state is also viewed as a social endeavor with spiritual and organic characteristics. Traditionalists think that any change spontaneously arises from the community's traditions rather than as a consequence of deliberate, reasoned thought. Leadership, authority, and hierarchy are seen as natural to humans. Traditionalism arose in Europe throughout the 18th century, mostly as a reaction to the chaos of the English and the French revolutions. Traditionalist conservatism began to establish itself as an intellectual and political force in the mid-20th century. We're not going to go too far into that, and I think we're pretty well done with this liberalism page. We'll go back to this. Let's see, supporting lesser degree hierarchical decision-making than the right-wing politics of the traditional conservatives and monarchists. In modern politics, the term left typically applies to ideologies and movements to the left of classical liberalism. Classical liberalism is a political tradition and a branch of liberalism that advocates free market and laissez-faire economics and civil liberties under the rule of law, with special emphasis on individual autonomy, limited government, economic freedom, political freedom, and freedom of speech, supporting some degree of democracy in the economic sphere. Today, ideologies such as social liberalism and social democracy are considered to be center-left. Social liberalism is a political philosophy and variety of liberalism that endorses social justice and the expansion of civil and political rights. Economically, it is based on the social market economy and views the common good as harmonious with the individual's freedom. Social democracy is a political, social, and economic philosophy within socialism that supports political and economic democracy. As a policy regime, it is described by academics as advocating economic and social interventions to promote social justice. It is described by academics as advocating economic and social interventions to promote social justice within the framework of a liberal. Let's look at this a little closer. Let's see. As a policy regime, it is a regime. It is described by academics as advocating economic and social interventions. A social intervention is an action which involves the deliberate intervention of a public or private organization into social affairs for the purpose of changing them. In other words, it is a deliberate attempt to change society in some way, an alteration of the social structure, probably by the government that lords over them, because they've let their freedoms go. They have become a little bit corrupt, I would say, to promote social justice. You got to promote social justice. You got to come in and change a bunch of stuff to get your social justice back when you lose it to socialism. Let's look at this a little bit closer. Social interventionism, public-private organization into social affairs. In the late 20th century, the rise of the Washington Consensus, a social interventionism, fell out of favor in international political thought. Academic research for social interventions occurs in many public policy schools around the world. Social interventionism is one of the two defining features of modernity and modern political systems, the second feature being mass politics. Mass politics is an order resting on the emergence of mass political parties. This new ethos was based upon Enlightenment rationalism, with its belief that human society can and should be improved through the application of reason, as well as 17th century cameralism, Commercialism was a German science of public administration in the 18th and early 19th centuries that aimed at strong management of a centralized economy for the benefit mainly of the state. The discipline the discipline in its most narrow definition concerned the management of the state's finances. I kind of see some of that going on today in the United States. Pioneered the use of statistics and data in making government decisions. What do you know? Social interventions could take many forms depending on the ideology and of the people or the institutions undertaking them, and both the left and the right wings of European politics supported the broad idea of social interventionism, though they disagreed on how society should be improved and what improvement meant. And there you come to the crux of the matter between the left and the right. It's like there's a puppet master in the shadows, and he's got the left and the right politics one on each hand, and he's just, ooh, let's piss these people off, and ooh, now we're gonna piss these people off. The left and the right, let's keep them going, let's keep the grift alive. Alright, so let's go back to, we're back on left-wing politics. Social democracy considered to be center-left, with the left, while the left is typically reserved for movements more critical of capitalism, including the labor movement, socialism, anarchism, communism, Marxism, and syndicalism. Syndicalism is a revolutionary current within the labor movement that seeks to unionize workers according to industry and advance their demands through strikes, with the eventual goal of gaining control over means of production and the economy at large. Okay, so this is kind of like, these are unions. Yeah, labor unions. So the left is reserved for movements more critical of capitalism. Criticism of capitalism is a critique of political economy that involves the rejection of or dissatisfaction with the economic system of capitalism and its outcomes. And it's written by Karl Marx. What do you know? We've been studying Karl. We're studying you, Marxy boy. Reserved for movements of critical of capitalism, including the labor movement, socialism, anarchism, communism, and Marxism, and syndicalism, each of which rose to prominence in the 19th and 20th centuries. In addition, the term left-wing has also been applied to a broad range of culturally liberal social movements, including the civil rights movement, feminist movement, LGBTQRXYZ movement, abortion rights movement, multiculturalism, anti-war movement, and the environmental movement, as well as a wide range of political parties. Alright, let's gloss over right-wing politics a little bit. Right-wing politics describes the range of political ideologies that view certain social orders and hierarchies as inevitable, natural, normal, or desirable, typically supporting this position based on natural law, economics, authority, property, or tradition. Hierarchy and inequality may be seen as natural results of traditional social differences or competition in market economies. Right-wing politics are considered the counterpart of left-wing politics, and the left-right political spectrum is one of the most widely accepted political spectrums. The left-right political spectrum is a system of classifying political positions, ideologies, and parties with emphasis placed on issues of social equality and social hierarchy. In addition to positions on the left and on the right, there are centrists and moderate positions which are not strongly aligned with either. I would say that I probably fall into this category, but we're not done yet. I like some things on the left, and let's see if I like some things on the right. So far, I see, what's natural law about? A system of law based on close observation of human nature and based on values intrinsic to human nature that can be deduced and applied independently of positive law. According to a theory of law called just naturalism, all people have inherent rights. Alright, well, natural law, I like a little bit of that. Tradition, belief or behavior passed down within a group, I'm okay with tradition. Property gives people a right to control valuable things. I'm all for property. I think the left is like property too. The right to own property. What does this authority say? In the fields of sociology and political science, authority is the legitimate power of a person or group over the people. In a civil state, authority is practiced by the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government. Well, we've had that for hundreds of years. I don't think authority is going anywhere on either side of the politics. Let's see. Politics considered left-wing politics, considered a counterpart of left-wing politics, and the left-right political spectrum is one of the most like. The term right-wing can generally refer to the section of a political party or system that frequently emphasizes in the defense of free enterprise and private property, and generally favors socially conservative ideas. Conservatism is a cultural, social, and political philosophy that seeks to promote and preserve traditional institutions, practices, and values. The central tenets of conservatism may vary in relation to the culture and civilization in which it appears. The right includes social conservatives or fiscal conservatives. Social conservatism is a political philosophy and a variety of conservatism which places emphasis on traditional power structures over social pluralism. Social conservatives organize in favor of duty, traditional values, and social institutions such as traditional family structures, gender roles, sexual this, that, and the others. Fiscal conservatives or economic conservatism is a political and economic philosophy regarding fiscal policy and fiscal responsibility with an ideological basis in capitalism, individualism, limited government, and laissez-faire economics. Fiscal conservatives advocate tax cuts. Tax cuts reduce government spending, free markets, deregulation, privatization, free trade, and minimal government debt. Government debt is the financial liabilities of the government sector. Changes in government debt over time reflect primarily borrowing due to past government deficits. A deficit occurs when a government's expenditures exceed revenues. Government debt may be owned to domestic residents, and that and the other. Deregulation is the process of removing or reducing state regulations. Government spending includes all government consumption, investments, and transfer payments in national income accounting, the acquisition by governments of goods and services for current use to directly satisfy the individual or collective needs of the community. So they like these fiscal conservatives like tax cuts, reduce government spending, free markets, deregulation, privatization, free trade, and minimal government debt. I feel like I could get on board with most of these. Free market economic system in which the prices of goods and services are determined by supply and demand, expressed by the sellers and buyers. Privatization means several different things, most commonly referring to moving something from the public sector into the private sector. It's also sometimes used as a synonym for deregulation when a heavily regulated private company or industry becomes less regulated. The term has its origins in the era of the American New Deal during the 1930s, as a result of the policies initiated by modern liberals. Don't we have a New Deal right now? The Green New Deal? The Congressional Progressive Caucus has proposed a 21st century New Deal for jobs that aims to transform the foundations of America's economy by making Wall Street, big corporations, and the wealthiest pay their fair share. The plan invests $2 trillion over 10 years, employing 2.5 million Americans in its first year to rebuild transportation, water, energy, and information systems, while massively overhauling schools, homes, and public buildings. Former Mayor of Chicago and Chief of Staff President Barack Obama believes that we need to upgrade the system to have a 21st century economy in all respects. So we do have a New Deal today. But back in the 30s, it was a series of programs, public work projects, financial reforms, and regulations enacted by President Franklin D. Roosevelt in the United States between 1933 and 1939. Major federal programs and agencies included the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Works Progress Administration, and the Civil Works Administration, the Farm Security Administration, the National Industrial Recovery Act of 1933, and the Social Security Administration. So all these were created during this New Deal era in 1930s. They provided support for farmers, the unemployed, youth, and the elderly. The New Deal included new constraints and safeguards on the banking industry and efforts to reinflate the economy after prices had fallen sharply. New Deal programs included both laws passed by Congress as well as presidential executive orders during the first term of the presidency of Franklin D. Roosevelt. So that's cool, I guess. So that's fiscal conservatism. Anti-communism. The following positions are typically associated with right-wing politics. Anti-communism. The original use of the term right-wing relative to communism placed the conservatives on the right, the liberals in the center, and the communists on the left. Interesting. Early Marxist movements were at odds with traditional monarchies that ruled over much of the European continent at the time. Many European monarchies outlawed the public expression of communist views, and the Communist Manifesto, which began a specter that is haunting Europe, and stated that monarchs feared for their thrones. Advocacy of communism was illegal in the Russian Empire, the German Empire, and the Austria-Hungary, the three most powerful monarchies in continental Europe before World War I. Many monarchists, except constitutional monarchists, viewed inequality in wealth and political power as resulting from a divine natural order. The struggle between monarchists and communists was often described as a struggle between the right and the left. By World War I, in most European monarchies, the divine right of kings had become discredited and was replaced by liberal and nationalist movements. Most European monarchs became figureheads, or they yielded some power to elected governments. The most conservative European monarchy, the Russian Empire, was replaced by the Communist Soviet Union. The Russian Revolution inspired a series of other communist revolutions across Europe in the years 1917 to 1923. Many of these, such as the German Revolution, were defeated by nationalist and monarchist military units. During this period, nationalism began to be considered right-wing, especially when it opposed the internationalism and the communists. The 20s and 30s saw the decline of traditional right-wing politics. The mantle of conservative anti-communism was taken up by the rising fascist movements on the one hand and by American-inspired liberal conservatives on the other. When communist groups and political parties began appearing around the world, their opponents were usually colonial authorities, and the term right-wing came to be applied to colonialism. After World War I, the communism became a global phenomenon, and anti-communism became an integral part of the domestic and foreign policies of the United States and its NATO allies. Conservatism in the post-world era abandoned its monarchist and aristocratic roots, focusing instead on patriotism, religious values, and nationalism. Throughout the Civil War, post-colonial governments in Asia, Africa, and Latin America turned to the United States for political and economic support. Communists were also enemies of capitalism, portraying Wall Street as the oppressor of the masses. The United States made anti-communism the top priority of its foreign policy, and many American conservatives sought to combat what they saw as communist influence at home. This led to the adoption of several domestic policies that are collectively known under the term McCarthyism. McCarthyism, also known as the Second Red Scare, was the political repression and persecution of left-wing individuals and a campaign spreading fear of alleged communist and Soviet influence on American institutions and of the Soviet espionage in the United States during the late 1940s through the 1950s. After the mid-1950s, U.S. Senator Joseph McCarthy, who had spearheaded the campaign, gradually lost his public popularity and credibility after several of his accusations were found to be false. Interesting. Alright, so let's move on to... What happened there? Hold up. Oh, come on. Economics. Post-revolutionary France. The right focused against the rising power of those who had grown rich through commerce and sought to preserve the rights of the hereditary nobility. They were uncomfortable with capitalism, the Enlightenment, individualism, and industrialism, and fought to retain traditional societal hierarchies and institutions. In Europe's history, there have been strong collectivist right-wing movements such as the Social Catholic Right that have exhibited hostility to all forms of liberalism, including economic liberalism. Economic liberalism is a political and economic ideology that supports a market economy based on individualism and private property in the means of production. Adam Smith is considered one of the primary initial writers on economic liberalism, and his writing is generally regarded as representing the something. In the 19th century, the right had shifted to support the newly rich in some European countries, particularly England, and instead of favoring the nobility over industrialists, favored capitalists over the working class. Other right-wing movements, such as Carlism in Spain and nationalist movements in France, Germany, and Russia, remain hostile to capitalism and industrialism. Nevertheless, a few right-wing movements, notably the French Nouvelle Droite, Casa Pound, and the American Paleoconservatism. What are all these? Sometimes shortened to Initialism, is a far-right political movement which emerged in France during the late 1960s. The Nouvelle Droite is at the origin of the wider European New Right. Various scholars of political science have argued that it's a form of fascism. Casa Pound is an Italian neo-fascist movement and formerly a political party born as a network of far-right social centers arising from the occupation of a state-owned building by squatters who, in the neighborhood of Esquilino in Rome on the 26th of December 2003. Paleoconservatism is a political philosophy and strain of conservatism in the United States, stressing American nationalism, Christian ethics, regionalism, and traditionalist conservatism. Paleoconservatism's concerns overlap with those of the old right that opposed the New Deal in the 1930s. 1930s and 1940s, as well as with paleo-libertarianism and right-wing populism. Okay, so there's a paleo-conservatism and a paleo-libertarianism. There's so many different strains and versions and sublets and blah, blah, blah. Everything just keeps on going. It's a political activism strategy aimed at uniting libertarians and paleo-conservatives. It was developed by American anarcho-capitalist theorists Murray Rothbard and Lew Rockwell in the American political context after the end of the Cold War from 1989 to 1995. They sought to communicate libertarian notions of opposition to government intervention using messages accessible to working and middle-class people of the time, and combining libertarian and free market views with the cultural conservatism of paleo-conservatism, while also opposing protectionism. Protectionism, sometimes referred to as trade protectionism, is the economic policy of restricting imports from other countries through methods such as tariffs on imported goods, import quotas, and a variety of other government regulations. The strategy also embraced the paleoconservative reverence for tradition and religion. This approach, usually identified as right-wing populism, and was intended to radicalize citizens against the state. The name they chose for this style of activism evoked the roots of modern libertarianism, hence the prefix paleo. The founding movement was American classical liberalism, which shared the anti-war and the anti-New Deal sentiments of the old right in the first half of the 20th century. Paleo-libertarianism is generally seen as a right-wing ideology. Alright, so here's some of the tenets of paleo-libertarianism. This school of thought seems to attempt to combine the left and the right, while also being considered a right-wing ideology. The paleo-libertarian strategy was expected to shift the libertarian movement away from the influence of public policy-oriented libertarian organizations based in Washington, D.C., who were accused of giving up on communicating the complete libertarian message and of adopting the political and cultural values of the Beltway to gain acceptance among the political elite, and to simultaneously shift American right-wing politics away from the neoconservative movement and its promotion of hawkish or interventionist foreign policy, usually characterized as imperialist by libertarian thinkers. According to Rockwell, the paleo-libertarian movement harkens back to such thinkers as Ludwig von Mises, Albert J. Nock, and Garrett Garrett, and the entire interwar old right that opposed the New Deal and favored the old republic and distinguished themselves from neo-libertarians. Hold on a second. Trying to get more comfortable here. Where was I? So they distinguish themselves from neo-libertarians, which are the political and social philosophy that combines the libertarians' moral commitment to negative liberty with a procedure that selects principles for restricting liberty on the basis of a unanimous agreement. in which everyone's particular interests receive a fair hearing. Okay. They distinguish themselves from these people. Beltway libertarianism is a pejorative term used by hardline libertarians. Hardline is an adjective describing a stance on an issue that is inflexible and not subject to compromise. To describe libertarians who have gained traction in the Beltway. What is the Beltway? It's an American idiom used to characterize matters that are or seem to be important, primarily to officials of the U.S. federal government, to its contractors and lobbyists, and to the media personnel who cover them, i.e. Washington, D.C. So hold up. Beltway libertarianism, used by hardline libertarians to describe libertarians who have gained traction in the Beltline. Okay, so this probably has something to do with lobbying and votes and favoritism and all of that, who are accused of surrendering libertarian values to the Beltway values in order to have better public relations. What's going on? Alright, so that's kind of like sellouts. Beltway libertarianism is like I guess it sounds to me like they're sellouts. Surrendering libertarian values to the Beltway values in order to have better public relations with the Beltway elite. Left libertarianism and lifestyle libertarianism. According to Rockwell, paleo-libertarianism made its peace with religion as the bedrock of liberty, property, and the natural order. Interesting. Paleo-libertarianism developed in opposition to the link between social avant-garde and libertarianism as if they were indivisible issues. In his 1990 essay, The Case for Paleo-Libertarianism, Rockwell charged mainstream libertarians with hatred of Western culture. He argued that pornographic photography, free thinking, chaotic painting, atonal music, and deconstructionist literature, Bauhaus, Secular Bauhaus, known as a German art school. Oh, okay, German art school. And modernist films have nothing in common with the libertarian political agenda, no matter how much individual libertarians may revel in them. Of paleo-libertarians, he wrote that we obey, and we ought to obey, traditions of manners and taste. After explaining why libertarians friendly with conventional culture could make a better argument for liberty to the middle class, Rockwell predicted in the new movement, libertarians who personify the present corruption will sink to their natural level, as well as Libertarian Party, which has been their diabolic pulpit. The Libertarian Party is a political party in the United States that promotes civil liberties, non-interventionism, laissez-faire, capitalism, and limiting the size and scope of government. The party was conceived in August 1971 at a meeting in the home of David F. Nolan in Westminster, Colorado. In short, according to Lew Rockwell, the motivation of this paleo-libertarian movement, in contrast with the modal libertarian movement of the Beltway and Libertarian Party as it existed in the early 1990s, was the application of the libertarian principles in ways that lead to the radicalization of the middle classes against the state. In contrast with the modal libertarian movement of the Beltway and Libertarian Party as it existed in the early 90s, paleo-libertarian movement was the application of the libertarian principles in ways that lead to the radicalization of the middle class against the state. In 1992, essay Right-Wing Populism, a Strategy for the Paleo Movement, Rothbard reflected on the ability of libertarians to gain the disaffected working and middle classes using right-wing populism methods to deliver libertarian ideas. Ron Paul newsletters, the libertarian publication Reason, asserted that half a dozen longtime libertarian activists, including some still close to Ron Paul, all named the same man as Paul's chief ghostwriter, Ludwig von Mises Institute founder Llewellyn Rockwell Jr., although Rockwell denied it. One second here. Alright, so what's the influence? During the 2016 Republican Party presidential primaries and the campaign for the 2016 United States presidential election, several figures active in 1990s paleo-libertarianism expressed levels of sympathy for the messages of then-candidate Donald Trump. Lew Rockwell was sympathetic to Trump's 2016 presidential campaign because of his message against the Republican Party and Democratic Party establishments, as was Rothbardian Justin Raimondo, who voted for Trump on the basis of foreign policy. In a 2016 pre-election debate with Reason... Okay, so Reason is an American libertarian monthly magazine published by Reason Foundation with a tagline, Free Minds and Free Markets. So Nick Gillespie. I don't want singing in my music. Thank you. Battleground states to support Trump and the cast votes for Libertarian Party nominee Gary Johnson, citing the Trump campaign 2020. Alright, so that's paleo-libertarianism. I'm not really a fan of Trump, but I can get behind some of the things of paleo-libertarianism, although I wouldn't call myself a hard line, you know. I'm not a hard line on anything. Alright, let's go back to left wings. Economics of the left wing. So we read a little bit of the economics here. Modern times right wing is sometimes used to describe laissez-faire capitalism. Laissez-faire capitalism is a type of economic system in which transactions between private groups of people are free from any form of economic interventionism. As a system of thought, laissez-faire rests on the following axioms. The individual is the basic unit in society, i.e. the standard of measurement in social... The individual is the basic unit in society, the standard of measurement in social calculus. The individual has a natural right to freedom, and the physical order of nature is a harmonious and self-regulating system. Markets should be naturally competitive. Alright. In Europe, capitalists perform alliances with the right during their conflicts with workers after 1848. In France, the right... I'm still talking about right-wing. I haven't gone back to... I want to finish the economic section of right-wing, and then I'm going to go do the economic section of left-wing. So we've got... the right was... throughout the post-revolutionary France and the Enlightenment and all this crap, the right was uncomfortable with capitalism, enlightenment, individualism, and industrialism, and fought to retain traditional social hierarchies and institutions. In the 19th century, the right had shifted to support the newly rich in some European countries, particularly England. Paleoconservatism, they remained hostile to capitalism and industrialism. Nevertheless, a few right-wing movements, notably the French blah 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 and American paleoconservatism, are often in opposition to capitalist ethics and the effects they have on society. Right-wing is sometimes used to describe laissez-faire capitalism, which everyone is a unit, and free market and all this, everybody's an individual and a butterfly and a sparkly flower. In Europe, capitalists formed alliances with the right during their conflicts with workers after 1848. In France, the right support capitalism can be traced to the late 19th century. The so-called neoliberal right, a term used to signify the late 20th century political reappearance of 19th century ideas associated with free market capitalism after it fell into decline following the Second World War. This is just a maze. It's just a never-ending hole. It's a pit. It's a big old rabbit hole pit. Ronald Reagan, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, combined support for free markets, privatization, and deregulation with traditional right-wing support for social conformity. Right-wing libertarianism known as libertarian capitalism or right-wing libertarianism, is a liberal political philosophy that supports capitalist property rights and defends market distribution of natural resources and private property. Not to be confused with neoliberals, which is a term used to signify the late 20th century political reappearance of 19th century ideas. Blah, 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 blah. Alright, let's go back to left wing. Economics of left wing. Anarchist economics, Marxism, and Keynesianism. Socialist economics. Left-leaning economic beliefs range from Keynesian economics and the welfare state through industrial democracy and the social market to nationalization of the economy and central planning, to the anarcho-syndicalist, a political philosophy and anarchist school of thought that views revolutionary industrial unionism or syndicalism as a method for workers in capitalist society to gain control of an economy and thus control influence in broader society. Yeah, right. I mean, I guess. Advocacy of a council-based and self-managed anarchist communism. And anarchist communism is a political philosophy and anarchist school of thought that advocates communism. It calls for the abolition of private property, but retention of personal property and collectively owned items, goods, and services. It supports social ownership of property and the distribution so it supports social ownership of property and the distribution of resources from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. This is a slogan by Karl Marx. So you get a distribution of resources according to your ability and according to your needs. Anarchist communism was first formulated as such in the Italian section of the International Workingmen's Association. The theoretical work of Peter Kropotkin took importance later as it expanded and developed pro-organizationalist and insurrectionary anti-organizationalist sections. Examples of anarchist communist societies are the anarchist territories of the Makoveshchina during the Russian Revolution, and those of the Spanish Revolution, most notably Revolutionary Catalonia. Alright, I gotta call this episode because I am about an hour. Well, I would say about 45 minutes needs to be where I cut myself off. Because anything longer than that, and I just cannot focus on the words. Especially these long words like anti-organizationists and the Makoveshchina Shikshanamadabala and the pro-organizationalist and insurrectionary. We'll pick this up where we left off. I may start back over with economics. We covered a pretty good bit, but I do want to go down the list here. I probably won't go over all these different countries, but I'll look at the United States. There's really not that much left to go over. I think I could probably pull this together with one more episode on left and right wing politics. But for now, I am going to call it quits, and we will pick up here on economics next time.